Hi, I'm Kesenya from Guiding Star with Kesenya. Thanks so much for joining me for this special series all about Saturn and his transits through each of the houses in the horoscope. Some of you might be familiar with a video I've done in the past all about Saturn and his transit through the sign of Aquarius and where that's going to fall for each sign. This video series may be a little similar to that. We might cover similar topics of information. But there will also be more depth in this series, so I thank you for joining me for this ongoing series throughout this autumn. Can I also just say I would be so honoured if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel and support the work that I do here in growing the knowledge of astrology throughout Australia and the world. So what is Saturn, first of all? Saturn is the seventh planet out from the Sun, when we include the Sun in this counting astrologically. Saturn is also the last of the visible planets that we can see with the naked eye in the sky at night. Beyond Saturn, to see Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, we need a telescope. And so it's considered in ancient astrology that Saturn is the planet that actually the final frontier, if you like, that correlates to our visible earthly reality, the manifested reality on planet Earth in this incarnation. Beyond that, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto all have correlations to our inner self, our psyche, our past lives, our wounds, our personal issues, and the way we think about things and the way we integrate things into our lives. So they are very psychological energies, whereas up until Saturn, we have both psychological things happening from those planets, but also material manifestation happening from the planets that we can see. It's an old Hermetic principle, which is called as above, so below, as without, so within. What we see in the sky above us is reflected in our reality on the earth. And the old principle taken further is also what is going on energetically within our soul and our psyche is also reflected on the outer in our earthly life as well. So Saturn, being the furthest planet out as a material planet, as a planet of manifestation, governs most strongly what happens on planet Earth, and for our individual journeys as well. And the reason that is that the further out you go with the planets, the more impact that they have on our lives here on Earth. That might seem a little bit odd. We might ordinarily think that the closer the planet, the greater impact it would have on us. Therefore, Venus should be the most impactful planet of all. But that's not the case in astrology, and it's to do with the time and the speed of a particular planet. With Saturn, its movement is so slow that the energy has time to build and therefore really pack a punch. Where Venus, or the moon if you want, for example, as well, they whiz around the astrological chart very quickly. The moon goes around in 1 month. Venus goes around in approximately, give or take, a year, depending on whether she goes retrograde or not. But Saturn takes 30 years to do a cycle of the astrological chart. And therefore, the energy has a lot of time to accumulate in one spot. And therefore, we feel the impact most strongly. Saturn, as with all planets, has things that it rules, things that it governs in this earthly reality that we experience. Saturn rules over structures, organizations, hierarchies, governments, regulations and rules. Saturn is also known as Father Time. He governs time here on planet Earth. There are some realms where time doesn't matter. Time is immaterial. But here on planet Earth, we are governed by time as a spirit being manifested into human material form. We are governed by time, and Saturn is the master of time. Saturn also represents things like responsibility, duty, hard work, maturity, perseverance, and endurance in life. These are all actually really great things, and we tend to receive the blessing of these Saturn positive qualities when we start getting into our mid to late 30s. That's when Saturn matures. In Vedic astrology, he reaches his maturation, and when he reaches his maturation, essentially we learn how to carry our burdens in life. And everyone at some point needs to learn that lesson. Certainly by the age of 35, 36, when Saturn matures, we step into our full adulthood. We're no longer young adults, we're no longer children, we have fully reached maturity, and hopefully, if we're manifesting at a high level, we've learned how to carry our burdens. Saturn represents structures, as I said, but also traditions. He is the master of the legacy we want to leave behind as well. He has a connection with the 10th house in astrology, which is all about legacy that we want to leave for those who come after us. He also has a connection to authority figures and those in authority over us. Saturn, on the more negative side of his energy, rules restriction and blockage, fear, holding things back, keeping things from us, and starving us of the things we like, but also equally starving us of the negative things in life if he is making a particular aspect in our natal chart. In astrology, Saturn is the ruler of two signs traditionally. The sign of Capricorn mainly, and then in traditional astrology, the sign of Aquarius. In modern astrology, Uranus is considered to be the ruler of the sign of Aquarius. But in traditional astrology, Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn and Aquarius. In archetypal astrology, Saturn is seen as the boss figure, the CEO. Because I like things to be a bit lighter and a bit more fun, I kind of envisage Saturn as kind of the head of control in the Get Smart series. If you're familiar with the Chief, he's managing all these bumbling idiots all around him trying to catch the bad guys. And here is the Chief just trying to keep everything under control, managed, well organized, well structured, and adhering to what needs to happen and the rules and principles of control in the series Get Smart. But he's still likable. A lot of people will paint Saturn to be the boogeyman of the horoscope. He's out to get you. He makes life tough. He's negative. And certainly some streams of astrology see him as the great malefic. I kind of liken him instead to the great father figure in the sky. If you imagine a father who's, his daughter or son is 16 and they're about to go out to a party, and dad, the father figure, is sitting there and as they run out the front door and says, "Hang on, what time are you going to be home? Where are you going? I want the phone number of the place where you're going to be. Are there going to be any other adults at the party? You've got to do things properly, by the book. There's no being silly, and I want you home by 10 o'clock. And the children are like, "Oh, Dad." But Dad's strict and firm and doesn't budge an inch. He sets boundaries. He says, "No way, home by 10 o'clock. You're not going to be one of those children who's out running around the streets at all hours of the night, getting up to no good." So he is this protector, father figure energy, authority figure energy in the horoscope. Now, sometimes we see people manifesting Saturn in a very negative way. They are the authority figure with abuse and violence and control. Now, often that would indicate a connection with Mars in a chart if that's how it was playing out. But then there are other people who manifest beautiful Saturn energy that's benevolent. That is, lots of boundaries, lots of regulations and rules, but it's for your greater good. It's for your upliftment. It's for the betterment of yourself, society, humanity, whatever. So there are many ways Saturn can manifest, but he is always the energy of this protector father figure. Even in karmic astrology, Saturn represents our fears that we have from previous incarnations. For example, if you happen to fall off, and many people who've had readings with me will have heard this analogy, if you happen to in a past life fall off the Grand Canyon to plummet to your death, and then you reincarnate and you've got this fear of heights you can't explain, that's Saturn putting protective boundaries of fear in place so that you don't go and fall off the Grand Canyon again and plummet to your death in the next life. So he is very much about our psychic protection or karmic protection, and sometimes people see him as a representation of karmic blockage based on the hurts and the wounds and the fears we've experienced in past incarnations. According to the reading I've done, Saturn rules the gemstone qualities of obsidian, also tourmaline and hematite, the heavy black stones that are, in the case of tourmaline especially, particularly good at absorbing energy. Saturn also correlates to the color brown, which is why for this series I'm dressing in very autumnal tones of brown. And as a ruler of the earth sign of Capricorn, Saturn is a very earthy type of planet, and it has a lot of earth energy about him. And so one of the remedies that we can offer for any Saturn troubled times is to be in nature or to walk barefoot on the earth. Saturn also rules rocks and gravelly soil and rocky places. Isolated places do come under Saturn's governance occasionally as well. So to be in those places is actually to be in a Saturnian environment, or to live in a garden full of rocks or a house that's made of stone is a very Saturnian environment to live in. Saturn also governs things like minimalism and restraint and restriction. If we were to have Saturn sitting permanently in our first house, then we might find that our body was restricted in some way, either through our size is restricted, or our height. So either our outward expression or our upward expression would be restricted. Saturn would be affecting our body in that way. So he rules restriction and restraint. So that's a little, in a nutshell, picture of what Saturn as a planet represents. Now we're going to dive into what it means to have Saturn transiting through the houses. But first, let's start with an explanation of how to assess where Saturn is according to whole sign astrology by transit. So how do we find out if Saturn is in your 10th house currently by transit? Well, the first thing to do would be to go to a site like planetwatcher.com or astro.com and have a look at the chart of the moment to see where Saturn is currently falling in the skies. As I'm recording this, it happens to be when Saturn has just moved into the sign of Aquarius. Now, this is not going to be the case a few years from now, but we're going to use Aquarius as an example. So here is Aquarius down here, and here is Saturn sitting in the sign of Aquarius. If you're watching this as the video is released, you'll note that if you go to planetwatcher.com or astro.com, you'll see Saturn sitting in the sign of Aquarius. So this sign of Aquarius needs to be 10 whole sign houses from your rising sign in order for this to be transiting your 10th house. So Aquarius would therefore be your 10th house if you were Taurus rising. Here we go. Here is my little symbol that means the rising degree, rising sign there. Taurus would be the rising sign, and currently Aquarius is transiting 10 houses from that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Saturn is transiting through the 10th house in whole sign astrology for Taurus. Now, in a couple of years, we'll see Saturn move into the sign of Pisces. Well, Pisces is the 11th house for Taurus. So that's not the video that we're looking at now. We want information about the rising sign for the 10th house. And in that instance, it will be Gemini having a 10th house transit. When Saturn moves through Pisces, it will be the sign of Gemini having a transit of Saturn through the 10th house, because it's 10 houses from their rising sign. So in this instance, let's go back to the Aquarius illustration, because that's where we're at right now. But you will need to check if you're watching a few years after this, which is 2020, I might add. If you're watching a few years afterwards, make sure you double check whereabouts Saturn is transiting, and then you'll be able to work out whether he's moving through 10 houses from your rising sign. And therefore, if that's what you have, then this is the video for you. Well, Saturn's quite comfortable in the 10th house, and this is quite simply because the 10th house is has a natural affinity with the energy of Saturn. It's about status, it's about leadership, it's about career and vocational calling, it's about hard work and the legacy we want to leave. And so there are connections here to Saturn energy. But what Saturn does when he's in the 10th house, he's calling us to take responsibility now for our life calling. He's calling us to take responsibility for our efforts in career. So it's a time also of rewards and promotions, potentially, if you've been working hard. Now, Saturn is a very karmic planet, and therefore wherever he goes, he will give the rewards. Often we don't see the rewards until he leaves that area of the horoscope. So in this case, when he leaves the 10th house, you'll get the rewards, you'll get the benefit, you'll get the well done. Here's your pat on the back from Saturn. But you can also, sometimes with the 10th house, because there's such a familiar energy of Saturn here, sometimes we can see rewards coming our way even in the middle of this transit through the 10th house. And I'll talk a bit more about that in just a second. But Saturn is the planet of karma. So what you've sown, you will reap in regard to 10th house things during this transit. And Saturn, as I've just said, the 10th house is our career, the legacy that we want to leave the world, our ability to have social status and authority and visibility in the world, to be seen. And so we can achieve in these realms over this 2.5 year transit that we're experiencing. Now, I'll give you an illustration from my life as to what happened when I had Saturn transiting through my 10th house. I had been a single mother for quite some time, and I'd had jobs that were a gift from the universe to me to help pay the bills and raise my family, but they weren't in the realm of career that I'd trained in, which was town planning, a very Saturnian industry, I might add. So I had a master's degree in town planning that I wasn't using or utilizing. And along came the Saturn transit to my 10th house, and I got the desire to start using my training, to use my, my learning to help me in life, to get a more advantageous position that would therefore in the long term help my children, because I would be earning more money and have a greater social status that would be influential in giving them a better life, as well as long-term effects for me to actually have a career instead of nothing when my children left home. So it's important for single mums to think about those things, for anyone really. And those things were prominent in my mind during Saturn's transit through the 10th house. And lo and behold, I was prompted by the universe, almost pushed by the universe. Just to pad that out a bit, I had to leave my home, where I grew up. Saturn is opposite the 4th house here, and when something is opposite, it means there's an energy of change that's given to, in this case, 4th house energy for me. And I had to leave my hometown, where I'd been living for about 6 years, and I had to go to a provincial city to get this new job in a town planning field that was going to give me much more leverage and social status and financial power in my life. And I was unable to find accommodation in the rural area where I lived. So it came to the crunch, and I thought I just have to move somewhere else because I've got nowhere to live in this small town, in this rural area. And so I'm going to have to move to a bigger city. So I did, and got my larger social status job, and away I went during Saturn's transit to my 10th house. So in that sense, Saturn's transit to the 10th house can be very good for work, for the career orientation that you might have. Now, if you, as I said, Saturn is karma, and if you've worked hard, if you've got the degree, if you've done the preparation, then you can receive the rewards, such as gaining an advantageous job, getting a promotion, rising up the career ladder while this transit is occurring. But if you have been shoddy, shall we say, or lackluster, or not interested, or doing things half-assed, or doing things with a less than stellar attitude or approach, then you get the karmic rewards for that behavior as well, which can be criticism and condemnation from bosses and authority figures. You might really struggle with work. Work doesn't quite gel for you, doesn't quite take you where you want it to, because perhaps there's some karmic retribution at play here. Now that can be from this incarnation, could also be a result of past incarnations. It all depends what else is happening in your chart to indicate those things. But shoddy work gets you shoddy results in career when Saturn is transiting the 10th house, whereas hard work, diligent work, good work will get you positive results as well. Now, as I've sort of said with my illustration, we can be quite status sensitive during Saturn's transit of the 10th house, where we want to achieve, we want to be seen to be shining in the world, to be successful. My status was, I was a single mother, and there was a lot of people in the area where I was that had a lot of pity on me, which was not comfortable, for somebody who wants to be, to achieve in life and to move forward in life. And so part of my move was in order to make myself of a greater social status, not just the poor single mum with 3 little kids, to actually move things forward. So we want to further our societal position. We want to advance our societal position. We can also be very objective during this transit about our career and about what we've done and about what we've accomplished or what we'd like to accomplish. We become realistic and grounded about our career and our vocation. There's sort of no airy-fairy romantic fantasies about, I'm going to be the next Queen of England. We actually realize that, I've got training in town planning, and so that's the realm I'm going to go into. It's a time when we tend to have to face the truth of our past performance as well. So do we deserve what we're reaping while we're seeing Saturn transit through the 10th house? You can assess that. Do I deserve what I'm getting here? Is this what I actually deserve for the effort that I've put in the past, for the study I've undertaken, through the achievements I've managed to accumulate in my lifetime? Am I getting my just desserts here? And you can sort of appraise that very objectively with Saturn moving through the 10th house. And if your answer to this is, well, no, I'm not getting what I deserve, no, I'm not getting what I've worked for, then you'll tend to want to make changes during Saturn's transit in the 10th house to be more in line with what you do deserve, career-wise and success-wise and social status-wise. We also can see with this transit that any previous hard work we have undertaken can have a big impact on the world. This is the house of impacting the world, and certainly Saturn here can indicate that the work, Saturn is work that you've done, can impact the world at a greater extent than we might usually see. Now, obviously, because of all this, we see a lot of people reaching the peak in their career aspirations and in their profession during this time. Quite simply, the older that you are when you have this transit, the more you're going to notice that. I mean, if you have a Saturn 10th house transit at age 21, well, you're obviously not going to reach the peak of your profession by age 21. There's a long way to go yet. And so there's a big difference between having a Saturn 10th house transit at 21 and Saturn 10th house transit at age 41, when you can actually, that what you produce can actually have greater impacts in the world. So do take that into account. But generally, we see great potential for career pinnacles during Saturn and his transit to the 10th house. I'd encourage you, if you're about to undergo this transit, to really take a long, hard look at your personal life and make any structural changes that need to be made in order to support you through this time of great career focus. This 2.5 year to 3 year transit of Saturn through the 10th house is incredibly demanding on you and your resources as a human being. Let me give you an illustration from my life. I moved to this larger city and started my job as a senior town planner with a company. It was a very high pressure job. There was a lot of demands on me, and really, because I was working for private enterprise, I was the meat and the sandwich between council and the requirements of council and the demands of the developers in that industry. And here I was in the middle, and that was demanding enough in itself. There was some great expectations on me to bring in clients and to generate revenue for the company. That was exhausting in itself. And then I was also required to work in a location 3 days a week that was about 2 hours from where I lived. And of course, I had 3 little children in primary school at this time. And so I had to hire a nanny. I had to, make a lot of financial sacrifices and arrangements to care for my kids when I wasn't there. When I was 2 hours away at another nearby city, working from their offices, long hours, late hours, getting home late at night, having to buy takeaway meals instead of healthy home cooked meals, things like that really suffered. My personal life really suffered under the intense expectations of this transit of Saturn through this house. Saturn's not an easy taskmaster, and that period of my life was very stressful and very, very difficult, juggling single motherhood and a professional life as well. Now, I certainly did the very, very best I could, but the stress levels were really high. So this is also a transit where you become realistic about what you need to do to fulfill your goals. And maybe there is a lot of stress involved with trying to achieve your goals, trying to be everything to everyone. And the reality of your place in life, your social status in life, is most painfully sometimes revealed. And I was forced to confront the fact that single mothers really do struggle to have a viable, healthy, flourishing career because they just carry so much on their shoulders. I'm not going to go into a big discussion about how this affects their future and their ability to retire comfortably, etc., but it's not easy. Certainly for me, this was highlighted during Saturn's transit through the 10th house. Saturn is also about our older age, and so our ability to have social status in older age was highlighted for me. What's going to happen to me? Am I going to end up living in a caravan because I just can't maintain the need to be the mother and the need to have this high pressure, high profile job? So I was confronted with the reality of my social status as a single mum. You might be confronted with the reality of your social status in some other arena of life and have to sort of do some deep introspection around that, do some meditation on that, do some realizing of some really hard, difficult truths about life and on planet Earth and our ability to succeed or otherwise. But one of the good things that comes out of this is that you will know what you need to do to fulfill your goals. As I said, sometimes that can feel like Mount Everest that you need to do to fulfill your goals. But for others, it will feel like, oh, okay, this makes sense. And this is what I need to accomplish, and away you go and you can do it. Probably depends very much on the quality of Saturn in your natal chart. But the other thing that occurs with Saturn's transit through the 10th house is this introspective review of the career path you've chosen. Is it really what suits you? Is it really where your heart is? And you will be forced to confront those things during this transit, just as I was. Okay, I'm a single mum. I've got this high profile, high pressure, demanding position in professional life. How long am I going to keep this up for? And what was really telling in my life was that in my mental dialogue, I kept telling myself, I just need to be a machine for a few more years. I just need to be a machine for a few more years. And then it was revealed to me through the course of this 2.5 year to 3 year transit that that was not a healthy attitude to have to my career, to my legacy, that I'm a machine. I just must be a machine, a providing machine, a mother machine, Where's the joy in that? Where's the delight in that? Where's my heart in that? Well, it wasn't there at all. I was just a machine going through the motions, just trying to survive. So Saturn causes inner confrontation, if you like, of those issues, How involved is your heart with what you're doing? And how much in line with your true self is what you're doing in the world, your career, your activities, your worldly achievements? How lined up with what you really want out of life are those activities? It's actually a time of great personal interrogation where you're not going to be too emotionally attached, because Saturn's a very unemotional planet, to the idea of success or failure. Emotionally, if you fail, if you fall down, it's not going to be emotionally devastating for you. Similarly, if you succeed and you fly high, it's not going to be the emotional exhilaration that you might feel at other times with different transits to the 10th house. It is much more detached than that. Saturn is a very detached energy, and it's just like head down, tail up. Let's get on with the show. Let's do what we've got to do. Let's do our duties. Let's face our responsibilities. Let's carry our burdens. Saturn energy. But you will look inward, as I did, and weigh up, okay, is my heart even here, or am I just a machine? As I said, though, it is a period of diligent, determined, highly disciplined, structured hard work. So you can expect you'll work harder than ever during this transit, but the potential to achieve good results is expanded, is increased too. You'll just have to keep in mind that for some of us, in fact for most of us, the results of this hard work may not manifest until the transit is over. So it's a period of 2.5 to 3 years of really full on, nose to the grindstone kind of work. Now, it's also the house of bosses. So your relationship with bosses at this time and people in authority over you actually reflects how much inner work you've done over the past few years in preparation for this time. Have you gained your success in a worthy manner? Do you deserve to be where you are? Once again, we ask ourselves these questions. Well, if so, then you get big ticks of approval from your bosses and authority figures and employers, etc. But if the answer is no, you haven't done what's needed, and you haven't you're not worthy of what you've achieved, then there can be big karma to face, big losses, public disgrace, public downfall even that can occur. But remember, you're going to be emotionally detached, so it probably won't go too deep with you if it happens, at an emotional level anyway. What was interesting in my journey with this transit was that, yes, I perceived myself to be a machine, and I was very much treated like a machine. You'll work long hours, you'll do extra, you'll do this, you'll do that, and just this expectation that I was not human, that I was to function like a machine. Now, I should wind up this before we get to the Hindu section of this reading, by letting you know what happened. I did reach a point during this transit where I just said, I can't do this. My heart is not in this anymore. I cannot keep being a machine. It will kill me. And my children will then lose out. And that happened for me through a really very unfortunate accident that was the result of me being completely burnt out. Trying to give too much and do too much, trying to meet the expectations of Saturn, which in my case I think were quite impossible. So this accident occurred. I'm not going to go into what that was, but it was really rather awful. And because of that, I realized enough is enough, and I had to resign, because I realized I couldn't keep doing meeting the demands that this transit was putting on me. And I looked at my heart and realized this was not what it was all about to me. Not social status, the money, the level of authority, etc., were not worth the price that I was paying. And that was the realization, the detached realization I came to under this Saturn transit. Fortunately, the universe had my back, and I was able to get a little bit of smaller scale employment that worked well with my family situation at that time. So interesting journey, Saturn through the 10th house in my case. Now, the 10th house also has to do with father figures, authority figures. As I've said, bosses, yes, but also father figures. And we can encounter sort of father-like people, or our actual father, who are, become very Saturnian. So your father might get very, not so much grumpy, but a strict disciplinarian, or very, very restrictive and putting sudden boundaries on you, especially if you experience this as a teenager. You might notice that your father becomes a real not a tyrant, but someone who's putting the boundaries that feel really like you can't breathe, kind of boundaries on your life. We can see father type figures in our life becoming more withdrawn, severe, more limiting, as I said, or they limit their own lives and their lives become limited under this Saturn transit. We also can sometimes find that our older fathers or father figures, maybe they have health problems or health issues that crop up in their life. Now, personally, I didn't experience that. My father is fine, and certainly didn't suffer through this transit. But for some people, we can see that play out. And so finally, in the Hindu system, and you can take the Western system, which I've just shared with you, and apply it to your life if you feel that it does, or the Hindu system, or both. Maybe there'll be elements of each that apply to your journey with Saturn through the 10th house. But when Saturn's transiting the 10th house, obviously, yes, he's transiting the 10th house in the Hindu system too, but also the 12th house, which sits here, the 12th house, the 4th house, and the 7th house. These are the houses. So the house opposite, the house 3 houses down, and the house 1, 2, 3, 4 houses back. So Saturn aspects those houses. Now, when he's aspecting the 10th house in the Hindu system, then we see that career difficulties arise. Blockages to career, restrictions in career, heavy boundaries in career, and lots of hard work in career that crops up. The aspect to the 12th house from Saturn means that we can incur debts, sudden debts that arise, or expenses, sometimes even theft as well of our things. Things disappear, things get lost during Saturn's aspect to the 12th house in the Hindu system. Also, the aspect to the 4th house can indicate that there might be issues with the mother. So not only with father, but with mother as well. Difficulties with home and something wrong, perhaps, some hiccups with home. I bought a home under this transit and it had white ants. Saturn rules white ants. That's termites for people in other parts of the world. And I had to fork out a lot of money trying to get the termites in my home repaired. Don't get me started on that. That was a nightmare. So difficulties with home, difficulties with land, difficulties with your car even. Saturn making an aspect to the 4th house can bring about all those sorts of things. There can be some struggles as well with relationships, particularly marriage by Saturn's aspect here to the 7th house. So there can be some blockages to even experiencing committed partnerships in life. If you're single and you're looking for someone, well, Saturn's aspect for 2.5 years can just dry things up and the tumbleweeds roll past and there's just nobody that you find attractive or appealing in a relational sense. So problems with marriage and problems with finding commitment if you're single, according to the Hindu system of Saturn's transit to the 10th house. So that's what we see with Saturn and his transit to the 10th house. I hope you'll join me next week for the video all about Saturn's transit to the 11th house.